Hello, welcome back again. Well, I have actually a good book that I really wanted to share with you and talk about. It's called Learning, How to Learn. And it's by Barbara and Terrence Sanakowski, PhDs. And these are two PhD people that wrote about, how do we learn? Because sometimes we're not taught how to learn. And we have different ways of learning. So, for example, some of us are visual, some of us are hearing, speaking, and touching. And you got to use your senses too. And sometimes you're just not taught how to learn, and we don't. Sometimes we don't know how we learn. And so it kind of talks about this, and this is how to succeed in school without spending all your time studying. And how do you study? It's a guide for kids and teens. So interesting book, interesting read. I would highly suggest reading this one because it really opens up a lot. So here we go. Your brain is a 3-pound brain. Your head's about a 10-pound weight, but your brain inside is about, it's about 3 pounds. Okay? And it's amazing. It has so many neurons and synapses in it. Neurons are the communications that goes from electrical to chemical to electrical, and they never touch. The dendrites and the neurons. Look it up, really cool. But you have all this wiring, and when you're born, you have so many neurons going on, and as you grow, you're pruning them. So you have to kind of rewire your brain a little bit for this. So the book reading, when you read a book, some of us don't know how to read a book, and that's part of learning too. When you pick up a textbook or pick up a book and you're reading through it, it's hard to kind of, a textbook versus a book like this is very difficult to comprehend and read because you don't know how to. So here we go. Your brain works as a focus mode and a diffuse mode. So as they're talking in this book, your brain works as a focus mode and a diffuse mode. A focus mode is that you're putting together a puzzle. And the diffuse mode is that you have to relax and be free. And so sometimes you have to, it's your way of processing the information that you're reading. And when you're trying to get the stuff in your head, you're in a complete laser focused vision. But when you're just reading for fun or something like that, you're kind of having some relaxed time. You're processing it as well. So creativity seems to pop out during diffuse mode. So Albert Einstein, he always loved imagination. He says that if you don't have an imagination, you don't have anything, because imagination makes you more creative. And so you have to kind of be out of that diffuse mode. You got to have to let your mind wander a little bit. So in the back of the book, they have a nice thing. Why sometimes letting your mind wander is an important part of the learning process. So when your mind wanders, you're kind of letting your brain go a little bit. Sometimes you can let it go too long, but at least it's wandering in a way that you're focusing on the concept that you're doing. You're thinking. So the reason we get stuck, that we have not given our brains a diffuse mode, we get kind of stressed out. We get stuck on our thinking because we don't really have time to relax our brain a little bit. We're making our brain work hard, and we don't have a time to kind of say, okay, I got to step back into this and just let it go. Wonder a little bit. Let me think about this in depth. So you're going through that diffuse mode, and when you go to sleep, you're letting your brain kind of reorganize the files in the compartment to put into your long-term memory. So that's why sleeping is a very good thing to do, and not cram so much the day of. You're spacing your brain out, so when you sleep, you can kind of put things in their categorical perspective. And and meditation is a very good one. You got to sit there and breathe. And breathing is a must, by the way. And so they kind of said, time and practice. Our brains need this to work together. So we need time and we need practice. And so when you're cramming everything into one little session, you don't have time to kind of let it ponder, to let it wonder, to let it have space to categorize, because you're on a time limit. Maybe you have an exam the next day, and you're just cramming. You're putting so much in, but a lot of it's not having time to get spaced out and organized and lined up. So you have to have practice too. We have to have good practice. Procrastination, they talk about procrastination. We put things off because we don't want to think about them and deal with them. And sometimes that builds up to the very end, and that stresses some people out because they do so much procrastination that they kind of shut their brain up a little bit. And so it activates what we call a pain center. Now, this pain center is like, well, if you procrastinate too long, the pain that you're going to get is that, oh my God, I don't have time to do it. And so you kind of have that sense of blame, not blame, but like guilt. Math is painful to do, so we procrastinate. So it's like so they're talking about like if you don't do it, you get painful, but it's like, oh, I don't want to do mathematics because it's too painful to do it. Because I don't want to think that much. I don't want to think about my job because some of my job stuff I don't want to do because I'm putting this stuff up. I don't want to clean my room because the painful is that just too much energy comes out of that. It's interesting as we think this way. We procrastinate stuff, we put stuff off, and then we regret it. So we have what we call in the book. They have something called active recall. Our brains begin to think because you're learning and understanding, and you have active recall that quickly. And so you're training your brain to say when you listen and when you're reading and you're processing that stuff, you can have your active recall is become a lot more conditioned. Better, grown, and your neurons are becoming a little bit more absorbent. So when you're learning math, I'm a mathematician and I love math and stuff like that, and I think that math opens your brain up and it makes your cognition a lot better. It makes you have more neuron connections, and it makes your brain a lot better because you're thinking a little bit more than you would without the math. And so your brain grows. Your neurons are firing together, but because they're wired together. And your brain links the connection. So you have all these neurons that are getting a lot more exposure, a lot more active. And that makes your brain think a lot more smoother. And you're more confident in your thinking. And then you kind of disregard that procrastination. You get rid of that procrastination. And so they have a thing in psychology, it's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is like the regrowing and the mold of your neurons. So here's an example. If you get into an accident and maybe one side of your brain it's in bad shape, it has to be taken out. Neuroplasticity says after a certain time, the brain starts to rework, starts to kind of grow in that spot. So your brain becomes a lot more resistant and it becomes more neuron. The neurons begin to grow again. So you have this electrical to chemical charge. You look at neural theory. It's really cool. And so what we learn may be different from what we do in everyday life. But the new learning helps keep us in mental shape. Sorry, butchered that one. So as you're learning each day and learning about the particular thing, you're becoming a lot more confident in that area. You're putting the time into practice. And you have to sometimes pause and recall. So when you're learning so much and you got to take a break and you got to just tell yourself, okay, breathe. Okay, I learned about this, and then you breathe a little bit, and then let it soak in a little bit to your brain. But I think part of it you have to apply it to in order to learn it. And once you learn it, teach it to somebody else. So that means you learned it 100%. Learning is getting rid of ignorance. We're all ignorant. Ignorance does not mean you're stupid. It's just that you haven't learned it yet. So when somebody says, oh, you're very ignorant, well, I haven't learned it yet. It's not really an insult. If somebody says you're stupid, well, that's an insult. That means stupid, you're not capable of learning. Being stupid does that mean they're telling you that you're not capable of learning. Ignorance that you haven't learned it yet. It's good for people to struggle. We have to struggle because that pain is good. Some struggling, some pain is good because it makes us work a little bit harder and makes your brain get rewired so you can get a lot more comfortable in that area. You have to sleep. Sleeping is good. It makes your neurons grow, actually. Yes, it does. Sleep helps change and store your information. The best way to understand something is to teach somebody else. And that's really what I kind of did myself. They kind of mentioned that, but I put that in myself because I think that's really important. That when you learn something, the best way to understand it is to teach somebody else. Very interesting. So you need your space for your patience. Patience and practice become a lot because you need time to soak that information in. The more you learn, the practice, and sleep, the more your stronger neurons will link together. Nothing is good from cramming. The brain does not have time to store all this information completely. You have to revisit it soon and apply it because you can lose it. And that's part of the learning curve. Keep practicing every day. And you got to sleep too. You have to when you learn something. This is a big problem for a lot of people. When you are learning something, you have to be fully focused into it. If you have like a TV in the background, you have music playing, maybe you have parents in the background, a brother and sister, you have your phone here. There's so many distractions. You're not throwing 100% of your attention into that. And I think that's a big issue when we come to learning something, is that you want to be kind of narrow, a tunnel vision. Here's the focus without all this other things, without all this other distractions in your way. So you want your working memory going at the same time. Your working memory is your short-term memory. It's like so for example, think of like a school bag. They mentioned this really interesting. You have your backpack. You're wearing a backpack, and it's like your school bag, right? And you can't hold much in that bag. You can only put so much in that bag when you're going to school, right? And that's like your working memory. Now, think of it this way. Your long-term memory, your other part of your memory, is that you have a locker at your school, and you put in your stationary stuff. You put your books and everything else you're carrying in that locker. And that's your long-term memory at work. So very interesting. I love how they did this in this book, is that your short-term memory is like you're carrying your backpack with you. And you can only store so much in that backpack before it gets too heavy or too much. You can't carry it anymore. But when you're at home or at your locker, they say a locker, you have stuff that you're putting in there for your long-term memory. Very interesting. And it only takes, neuroscientists say that for memory to work from short-term to long-term, it takes about 30 minutes for it to transfer to long-term. Depends on how you're strengthening those neurons. It takes a little bit longer. Like a habit, if you want a habit of not procrastinating, or a habit like, hey, I want to do this, I want to get into weights, every day or something like that. You're telling your brain that you have to work at least 60 days to get that habit to be without thinking about it. Pictures help. Sometimes to remember things, make a picture for it. So I tell my students this way: if you want to learn like the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? Make a picture of it on the board or in a piece of paper, and do that a couple of times, and that picture will relay that information to you. And that's always hard. If you're learning about in chemistry, you're learning about the periodic table elements. Make your own periodic table of elements. Just draw one and then do it yourself without looking at the picture that's already made for you, because you're getting a kind of a way to strategize those thoughts about looking at it. It's like taking a picture of California or Arizona or just the general United States. Can you make a picture without looking on the map? Can you make a picture of the United States? I can, because I've been around and I studied a little bit of the United States and I traveled around. I can kind of make a nice picture of it. Could I make a picture of Italy? Yeah, it's a boot. Could I make a picture of Africa? Of course, I can make a picture of Africa. What if I can take a picture of Madagascar? Oof, that might be a little hard. Maybe can I make a picture of Alaska? Yeah. Can I make a picture of Antarctica? But that's what you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make a picture to associate that learning to what you're doing. So pictures are really helpful. You're taking your facts that you're learning into a picture form, and so you stick in your brain. Pictures are actually a lot better than writing, actually, because you're associating with something that looks like. That's why they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, because it is. So yeah. So you kind of have your focus, you have to pay attention, you have to practice, and you have to make pictures of things. But you have to associate it. So they have 4 ways of remembering things in this book. And I mentioned a couple already. So one was you got to pay attention. You got to practice. You got to draw a picture maybe. The 4th one, I think I said this, is that you have to associate it. You have to assimilate it into your everyday life. And that's really hard. That's just comprehending a little bit and applying it. And the number 5, they say recall, recall, and recall. That's part of saying it over and over and over again. And then it eventually will sink in. Maybe making these devices that help you remember stuff. So for example, like a mnemonic device, if I said that right, mnemonic device. If I said, sorry, I've butchered that so much, but you hope you know what I'm talking about. But you're like you want to say all the planets, or you want to say the colors of the rainbow, and so the colors of the rainbow. Roy G. Biv is a good device indicator to show all the colors of the rainbow. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for PEMDAS, order of operations. My very educated mother just showed us 9 planets when Pluto was there. So that's all the planets. So there's these devices that kind of help you organize your thinking so you can be a little bit more effective in your way, these devices. Sometimes making metaphors and notes, a song about, will help you memorize some of this stuff. So a song helps. There's a song about the quadratic formula that's out there, and that has stuck in my head. Make metaphors. So a metaphor is just you're making some kind of way of it. It's like the sun is a hot ball of gas, just like a fart. Sorry to put that on you, but a metaphor is like, hey, it describes something else. Whatever. But your brain is so complicated, but it can be so simple too. And you have this prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking, your ability to strategize. And if this is so much bigger and if it's so much strong, that you will become a lot more smoother with what you're doing. And your frontal lobe doesn't stop developing until you're about 25, they say. Neurologist. And so you don't want to conflict that a lot, because that's going to be with you. It's always growing. And a lot of it is that you have these this what we call cognitive load. Now, cognitive is the amount of material effects you have. So when you're learning so much and you're putting so much in your backpack, and you carry around, you have so much going on. You have this big old load on the back, and there's so much thinking power there. So you kind of have to slow down and think about what you have in there first. And you have to practice that. And it takes a lot of time. And a lot of learning is linked. There's a lot of learning that's kind of linked to other things. So here's kind of like a, not a Venn diagram, but like a cluster. cluster diagram, where you have this center, and then you have here, 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 and here, and a lot of learning is linked. So if you can like associate what you're doing with other things, it will actually, your brain will come a lot more more structured, a lot more smoother. Your hippocampus in your brain is the centerpiece of your brain. Your hippocampus, like it's a shape of a seahorse. It's a seahorse shape, and that's kind of where your memory is kept. And there's so much into this here, and it takes a lot of practice, but it takes exercise too to make that strong. Memory is not something that you can just wear off for a summer or a month. You gotta always keep improving it to make it more stronger. So, mastery, in the book they say mastery is knowing something without thinking too much about it. Mastery is hard, and I don't think you're gonna master everything. I don't think you can describe mastery because you're always learning. A mathematician is not a master at his mathematician. I think they're always learning that. A teacher is not always a master because I really think they're always learning. But they call master, and I describe master in a little different ways. And I don't think anybody's a master until they reach a certain level. But even though we reach that level, they're still going to be learning and applying. So there's active learning, there's active recall, there's cognitive load, and there's a lot of diligent or deliberate practice. You're interlocking all your thinking together into one, all your learning, and you're picturing this as a memory. So suggestion in this book says when you're studying, sometimes if you study in different places, you're using other senses. So, for example, think of it this way. If you were studying at home in your room and you have great stuff, challenge yourself and go to another place and start studying because you're using all your other senses, your different senses in that area. Sometimes go to a little bit a louder place. So if you study always in a quiet place, go to a little bit more louder place and try to study. See what your learning does. See if you can differentiate your learning a little bit. And I tried this too. I like studying in a quiet place, but sometimes going to like a coffee place. I had tried to go study math or a subject I was doing, and sometimes that helped a lot because one, I had a coffee. I don't have to have a coffee, but it helps kind of have some background noise, just a little bit, because it kind of it tests you out a little bit. It puts more focus on what you're doing. So you're activating your other senses. Very interesting. So remember, you normally do not take tests in libraries. So when you're taking a test, you take a test in a classroom rather than in a library. So using those different senses in those different areas will help train your brain a little bit. It says, hey, I might be doing better here. Sometimes sleep helps. You got to sleep on it. I mentioned that so many times. What sticks better? Set a time limit. Sometimes we need to shut down a little bit and just relax and let your brain kind of sizzle. And that's because a meditation comes in. If you kind of play a video game or you socialize, that's good. But I think that you got to talk about your learning. You got to talk about what you learned too. And I think that's very good to have a group support. So like if you're studying with a couple people and you're throwing it back at each other, you're testing each other, that will help a lot. It's that transfer of learning. So a behavioral psychologist, Alfred Bandura, you can look him up. He was a social experiment on something like this on children. And he says that as children, we learn by imitation, our parents. You know, when a dad shaves, the kids should be doing this too. They're training, or they're getting dressed and they're putting their shirts on. The child is putting their shirt on. It might not be perfect the first time, but at least you're teaching, you're mentoring, you're modeling you're set up for them, and that's really good. But you're also transforming or transferring that information to other parts. So it's like I'm putting on my clothes, then I'm gonna go outside, or I'm putting on my clothes and then I look in the mirror. Says I'm gonna look at you. I know it's kind of basic, but at least that you're taking some skills that you're learning. Let's say math, and you're transferring those skills to physics. Then you're going to transfer those skills to chemistry. Then you're going to transfer those to biology. And you're just kind of transferring those skills to other fields, so your learning becomes a little bit more tighter and you're becoming a well-rounded person. It helps to learn something completely different because you're creating new pathways. That's good. Always learn something different because like a different language, or play a video game, or a board game, a new board game, because what you're doing, you're making new neuron connections that makes you a little bit more comfortable and better at things, and you're kind of more solid, more thinking, more outside the box thinking. They mention this, how to take tests well. Tests are always a struggle. People get test anxiety. So sleep, review, active recall, repeat, study days before, avoid distractions, read textbooks, discuss with other people, interleave. That means use other technologies, and deliberate practice. So bottom line, do other things to help you learn. Experiment to help you learn. Start with the hardest problem first, and then your willpower and understanding. So if you get stuck, you can move on. So a lot of people, when they take a test, they get stuck on. They only try the first problem, and then they get like stuck, and they waste so much time. But then your time is still going. Just figure something else out. Leave it. If you're not sure, come back to it. Leave a little note. Start with the hardest problem, because that's going to take you the longest time. It's a growth mindset. Does the answer make sense? The answer that you put down, does it make sense? Don't know. No, the thing is, they put in this, what is the point of learning? We talked about how to learn, what's the benefits of learning, but what is the point of learning? Well, they say it keeps your options open for the future. It's a privilege. Learning is a privilege. Some of us don't have technology, or they don't have books to read. They don't know how to read a book. I don't know. It helps you be inquisitive. Ooh. And it discovers the mysteries. You're discovering mysteries that you haven't learned before. Interesting. And it's a passion. You gotta have it. You gotta have it in your brain to learn, because sometimes when you're at a job, you do the job for certain long, but you don't grow. You don't learn anymore because you're in that job for a couple of years, and it says, I don't have to grow anymore. I'm done. You stay stagnant. So a couple things: avoid cramming, get those distractions out of there, get enough sleep, do some lazy learning. Lazy learning, and just relax a little bit. Do some fun reading. Do a lot of perseverance, or make it persistent. Set a schedule. And what's the most important part of what you're trying to do? So if you were learning the Pythagorean theorem, what's the most important part of the Pythagorean theorem? Well, it's a right triangle, and what side is the longest side. It only works for right triangles. The quadratic formula is only good for quadratics of second degrees. And you got to have A, B, and C. And what does that tell you? What's the benefits of chemistry? Well, knowing the periodic table of elements, the big picture of it. In physics, Newton's laws of motions. When you work in carpentry, okay, I know the measurements. I know what a blueprint is. What's the most important parts of that learning that you're taking into the job? So, wow, a long session, but I'm telling you, awesome book. I found it very good. There's a lot of good things I'd like to practice, and very interesting book. It was only like $17. I got it online. But it's very good, and I highly recommend anybody reading this book. So hopefully that you like that, and to be continued.